So we're on to quality control, and this is one of the part that some people don't enjoy this process, but it is definitely a part of the process of feature film compositing, at least. In television and episodic, you have quality control. It's at a lower standard. They don't nitpick you as much. But when you're working in feature films, the image is going to be shown on a huge movie theater screen. So people are going to see your image really up close. And if there's little mistakes all over the place, they don't accept that kind of quality, especially if you're working for, a high-end client, like some of the big movie studios. So this level of quality control I'm teaching in this tutorial is relevant to feature film stuff. If you're just doing your own indie films or you're doing films that don't require that, then this is still great to know, and that's totally fine. But you might not have the expectation of what I'm going to explain here. So don't worry about it. If it's like, wow, that's a high level of fidelity. Honestly, if this was my film or my shot, I would probably just leave it at this point and, just release this, because nobody's going to be able to tell if there's little tiny edge things or anything like that. This is more so for, the feature film level, where they have the extra money to go the extra mile, and sometimes they waste money on it, in my opinion. Sometimes they go through this phase, too extreme, and some people, there's varying opinions on that, but it's just a question of budget and whether or not they want to spend money on things that people might not necessarily notice. But that's the name of the game, and that's how we do it. So if you're getting paid to do it, you don't complain, you do your job, and that's pretty much it. But so I'm going to explain the process, and we'll just take a look at it. So let's just take a look. So a couple things we can go through and do is, what you want to do is you want to take your footage with your transformations and bring it next to your composite. So you can basically set it next to it and press 2 on your keyboard, so we can hit 1 and 2 and kind of switch between these. And if you have it set up properly like that, and you can hit W on your keyboard while you're pointing over here, and we can get the little wipe tool. If it's not working, just hit 1 or 2 on your keyboard and it should appear. Sometimes you can mess with this as well up here and it'll fix it. So essentially, one way to check your composite is to sort of wipe over the edges and look for little edges where you've lost detail. So here in this case, we've kind of color corrected it, so I think it's fine. But some areas, if you see anything that really stands out as being a loss of detail, maybe that's where you want to bring back. So like, for example, here we have this little white line that's going up, and then we kind of lose a little bit of that, part of the rope there. So we might be able to bring that back with one of the techniques we talked about earlier, like a luminance key or something like that. Otherwise, we could just go in there with a paintbrush and just paint a little bit of a brighter color if we want to just maintain that detail across that edge. So we could just paint back some of that detail. And there are some studios that work that way, kind of just painting back instead of trying to restore it in a proper sort of way. So we can continue through and just kind of go frame by frame and try to find little things that we can just sort of improve. So if I just look here, let's just keep going and sort of wipe. So here you can see our edge is a bit blurrier than the actual footage, but this is also because we defocused our footage. So in this case, it's fine because we added a fake rack focus, defocus to our footage. But if this was happening where you've lost detail and it's just blurry on the edge, you want to keep the crispness of the hair. So you want to go back there and actually try to keep that detail. But in our case, because we've done the defocus, we don't need to worry about that. So let's continue through. I think there was a frame here where I saw something that was a good example. This is a good example. So this is something that there's a problem with our alpha. So if we look here, we can see the little bit of pink through the strap. And if we go back to the original, we're not seeing that. So that's a problem with our alpha, where you need to go just fix that hole. And sometimes those appear more often when you're passing over brighter things in the background. So those are usually the areas to look out for closer. Even here, for example, we could darken that a little bit. You see the motion blur of this thing is kind of darker. And then, I don't know if we have all that motion blur there, or maybe it's just not apparent. So I'm going to show you guys a technique to maybe restore some of that without actually having to adjust your key. So there's a pretty cool trick that you can do to maintain detail over brighter areas, which is usually where you have a problem, because the kind of what happens when you have a bright thing behind a dark edge is you get this like eroding, where like if you look at the edge, it looks like it's kind of curving in a little bit. And this actually happens with real footage. It's not like it's not a mistake. This actually happens where you get this really strong glow, and it looks like the edge is almost eroded. So I wouldn't say that this is a mistake, but there are ways to reduce that effect if it's just not pleasant on the eye, particularly if it looks like it's kind of dancing around. So for example, maybe it looks like it's curved there, and then it's kind of curved here. But that's because you're moving over some very bright highlights. But I'm going to show you guys a way to keep it less eroding kind of look. And it might even solve some of these problems where light is coming through our key without even having to go back and fix our key. There's actually a way to mix this differently. So yeah, that's the kind of things you want to look out for QC. I'm not going to go too hard on the QC process for this because of what this project is. It's just to teach you guys how to do it. And pretty much all the techniques of fixing these things are essentially the same techniques that we already learned. You just have to go in there and kind of redo different areas. For example, here would be another QC area that probably would get pointed out is on our edge here, we have a dark sleeve, but in our composite, we've edge extended and we're getting this like bright edge around. So that would probably not pass QC. You'd need to go in there and basically erase that and make it just so it's like exactly the same as the real footage. So that's like, those are little, especially edge detect areas. That's where you're going to get nailed on QC. You're going to get spotted. So this is another area. So maybe we're seeing through too much, or maybe there's a little bit too much motion blur or something weird happening there. It looks like we have a light halo. So we want to go in there with an eraser and just kind of erase that portion. And you need to go, and this is an intensive process. Sometimes you can spend multiple days QCing stuff. So you have to go through and just like really fine tune, stuff like this that would be too bright. So you need to darken that edge on just that frame. Again, I'm not going to go through and do all these changes just because, this isn't going to be submitted for a feature film or anything like that. But I just want to teach you guys how to do it. Again, this is another thing. So you can see if I zoom in here, we have sort of this darker edge with the detail. And then when we go over, it's sort of grayish. So one thing that would also be pointed out is particularly if this wasn't a repo shot, meaning we've repositioned it, which kind of damages the grain. If you look at the original, we kind of lose a little bit of sharpness. It's like if you look at his eyelids, we're losing some sharpness from the original footage. And that's because we've repositioned our shot and we've put a fake grain on. So we've actually lost a lot of detail in his eyelids. But because we're kind of animating this plate around, that's kind of unavoidable. And we don't have... We also don't have the high-end denoiser that you can actually use that kind of maintains detail a little bit better. If you want to renoise with the original grain like we did on the previous project. But those are just things to look out for. But yeah, like I said, if you're moving your picture around, meaning we're doing something like this, it pretty much is going to mess up the grain. And usually you just put a fake grain on. Most people will accept that. And yeah, that's just something to think about. So yeah, in the next video, I'm going to go through. So there's another example of this little strap is a little bit see-through. So you just need to go there and fix the alpha on a couple frames. So I'll probably do that fix, but some of the other ones, I'm just going to leave them. Something like this, there's definitely a QC problem. If you go around, you can see it. So I'll try to fix that one because that's kind of an obvious one. Is there's like a little bright edge that if I go around, you see it seems like it's sliding up the character. Like there's kind of a white edge that's kind of going up. So you don't want stuff like that because it's distracting. Like that's actually a movement. And so that's something you want to just darken. so that we don't have any of that. So I'm going to teach you guys about the highlight mixing thing in the next one, and also I'll just go through and fix those small little things. But those are the kind of main things that stand out to me, and the way you can just go through and check. Some other things you can do to check your composite as well is you go to the end and just look at the comp itself and kind of gamma up all the way and try to check your blacks. So are there any black points that seem not to sit in? And immediately, yes, there is to me. So like this arm, I think that we could probably bring the black point down a little bit. You see how it's a little bit gray compared to everything else. So this we just need to adjust that black point and bring it down a tiny bit more. You see on the normal exposure, it seems kind of okay, but if we gamma up, it becomes really obvious that that's not okay actually. And actually, you know, if you look at it, then it seems okay. Well, that's too bright. So we need to bring that down a bit. We can also gain up to check that. So that's another way to check it. Sometimes it's a bit harder to see. So usually I do both, just to see if anything stands out. Another thing you can do is a saturation test. If there's any colors that stand out, I think I talked about this already, but you just crank up saturation as far as you can. And if there's any colors that seem not like they belong, that might be something you want to worry about. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Another area that in QC that another mistake area that is common is if I go before the crop, I'm just going to go before here. In this case, we're cropping it off, so it doesn't matter, which is pretty common that you will have a crop in a film, feature film. But sometimes you want to be careful around the edges as well, because sometimes you get, like for example, his hand is supposed to be going off the frame, but because we've moved him around and done some motion blur, there's actually some missing pixels right on the edge of the kind of the bounding box of the frame. So that's an area that a lot of times is always going to be like, that's somewhere where you always want to check, is around the edges of your frame. You want to go around the very edges and just make sure there's no like gaps between some elements that you added or anything like that. Because a lot of times when you're playing around with sizes of stuff, see, like for example here, his hand is cut off. So we would need to just rotopaint that and extend just that little tiny bit. But in our case, we just cropped it because, you know, that's ultimately what the final image is going to be anyway. So I'm not going to waste time with things that are underneath the crop. But if you're on a feature film, even though it's under a crop, they still will make you change those things. So that's just something to keep in mind. And yeah.